In the dark void between galaxies, where civilizations rise and fall like dying stars, there exists a truth that terrifies every sentient species. Evil always wins. For 10,000 years, the Shadowkin Syndicate has proven this beyond doubt. They are the galaxy's apex predators, pirates, slavers, and merchants of suffering who turn entire star systems into their personal hunting grounds. No military force has ever defeated them. No alliance has ever stood against their might. No hero has ever brought them justice. They believed they had seen every form of life the universe could produce. They had broken warriors from 1,000 worlds, enslaved species that breathed poison and ate starlight, and crushed empires that spanned entire galactic arms. But they had never encountered a human. And humans, as the universe was about to learn, don't just seek justice, they become it. This is the story of how one species from a small blue world brought judgment to those who believed themselves beyond its reach. This is the story of how the Underworld learned to fear the light. The slave markets of Vorthak Station operated under blood-red lights that cast everything in the color of fresh wounds. Captain Zythex of the Shadowkin Syndicate walked through the crowded corridors with the confidence of a predator who had never known fear. His 4 arms moved with practiced ease, 2 counting credits while the other 2 rested on the plasma weapons at his sides. Around him, the screams and pleas of newly captured slaves created a symphony he had grown to appreciate over his 3 centuries of service to the Syndicate. Vorthak Station was more than just a trading post. It was a monument to the galaxy's acceptance of evil. Built inside a hollowed-out moon, its corridors stretched for hundreds of kilometers, housing everything from slave auctions to weapon bazaars to torture chambers where captured enemies were broken for entertainment. The station served as one of 12 major hubs for the Shadowkin Syndicate, an organization so powerful that entire galactic governments paid tribute rather than face their wrath. The Shadowkin themselves were creatures born from nightmares. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies were covered in chitinous armor that grew from their flesh. Their faces held 6 eyes arranged in a hexagonal pattern, each one capable of seeing different spectrums of light, making them nearly impossible to hide from. Most terrifying were their hands, elongated appendages that ended in claws sharp enough to slice through steel, dripping with a paralytic venom that kept their victims alive, but helpless during capture. Zythex paused at Auction Block 7, where today's fresh acquisitions were being displayed. A group of Zolonian refugees huddled together, their blue-scaled skin dulled with fear and exhaustion. They had been fleeing a war on their homeworld when Shadowkin raiders intercepted their transport. Now they would spend whatever remained of their lives serving masters who viewed them as nothing more than property. Magnificent specimens, hissed Tormax, Zythex's second-in-command, approaching with a datapad clutched in his lower arms. The Zolonians will fetch high prices. Their telepathic abilities make them excellent servants for the mental labor markets on Griselda Prime. Zythex nodded absently, his attention focused on the auction's proceedings. The auctioneer, a cybernetically enhanced Vrex with a voice that could be heard throughout the massive chamber, was describing the various qualities of each slave. The bidding was fierce. Buyers from across the galaxy competed for the choicest specimens. Some wanted workers for their industrial complexes. Others sought fighters for their gladiatorial arenas. The worst buyers wanted slaves for purposes that even the Shadowkin found disturbingly creative. Any word from the Outer Rim patrols? Zythex asked, still watching as a young Zolonian female was separated from her family and led to a different platform. Her mental anguish was so intense that several telepathic species in the audience physically recoiled. The usual reports, Tormax replied, scrolling through his datapad. 3 Kandorian merchant fleets intercepted and captured. A Altarian diplomatic vessel that strayed too close to our territory. And something unusual from Sector 471. Reports of a new species that destroyed one of our scouting parties. This caught Zythex's attention. His 6 eyes turned to focus on Tormax with laser precision. Destroyed? Not captured or driven away, destroyed. Completely annihilated. Tormax confirmed, his voice carrying a note of unease. The scout ship sent a single transmission before going silent. They reported encountering vessels from an unknown species that refused standard surrender protocols. Zythex's mandibles clicked together, a sign of irritation among his kind. What makes this species think they can challenge the Syndicate? Don't they know who we are? That's the strange part, Tormax said, bringing up a holographic display from his datapad. According to the transmission, these creatures identified themselves as humans from something called Earth. But here's what doesn't make sense. They claim to be explorers and scientists on a peaceful mission. Peaceful? Zythex laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Then, why did they destroy our scouts instead of surrendering for processing? The transmission was garbled, but it seemed like they took exception to our standard greeting. The Shadowkin's standard greeting was well known throughout the galaxy. When encountering a new species or vessel, they would demand immediate surrender, followed by the transfer of all valuable individuals to Shadowkin custody for evaluation as slaves. Those deemed useful would be taken. Those deemed worthless would be killed, as an example. It was a system that had worked flawlessly for millennia. "Show me the transmission," Zythex commanded. Tormax activated the holographic display, and a crackling audio recording filled the air around them. Static mixed with the panicked voice of Scout Captain Vrylex. "Unknown vessels are approaching. They appear to be exploratory ships, attempting standard contact protocols. They're responding. Species identifies as human, demanding surrender as per Syndicate procedures. Wait, they're refusing. They say they won't be enslaved by murderers. Initiating capture procedures. By the void, their ships are moving fast. Weapons firing. How are they penetrating our shields? Hull breach on Deck 3. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. The signal says, 'This is Captain Sarah Chun of Earth Defense Force. You have attacked innocent explorers. Surrender immediately or face the consequences.' What consequences could they possibly? Emergency. Emergency. Main reactor compromised. How did they target our power core so precisely? Captain, the humans are demanding we stand down and prepare to be judged for your crimes." Judged? Judged by whom? "We are Shadowkin. We answer to no. Ship is breaking apart. Tell command that these humans fight like nothing we've ever encountered. They don't just want to win. They want justice." The transmission ended in static and silence. Zythex stood motionless for several moments, processing what he had heard. In 3 centuries of service to the Syndicate, he had encountered thousands of species. Some fought bravely before surrendering. Others begged for mercy. A few even tried to negotiate. But none had ever spoken of judging the Shadowkin. The very concept was absurd. They were the apex predators of the galaxy. They were the ones who judged others worthy of slavery or death. "Send a message to High Command," Zythex finally said. "Request a full battle group be dispatched to this Earth immediately. We need to teach these humans their place in the galaxy's order." "Already done, Captain," Tormax replied. "Battle Group Omega has been assigned to the mission. 300 ships, including the dreadnought Nightmare's Edge. High Command wants to make an example of this species before word spreads that someone successfully resisted the Syndicate." Zythex nodded approvingly. Battle Group Omega was one of the Syndicate's most feared fleets. They had broken the resistance of entire star systems and reduced proud civilizations to cowering survivors. If these humans wanted a war, they would get one, and they would learn why the galaxy's criminals and warlords bowed to the Shadowkin. Around them, the slave auction continued. The Zolonians were sold off one by one, their families separated forever. Children went to labor camps. Adults went to industrial complexes or fighting rings. The elderly, deemed too weak for useful work, were sold to buyers whose purposes were best left unspoken. This was the natural order of the galaxy as the Shadowkin saw it. The strong dominated the weak. The cruel prospered while the kind suffered. Justice was a concept for naive species who hadn't yet learned that the universe rewarded power above all else. As Zythex watched the last of the Zolonians being led away in chains, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Soon, this mysterious human species would join the ranks of broken peoples who served the Syndicate. Their ships would be added to the fleet. Their technology would be studied and improved upon. Their strongest individuals would become gladiators or soldiers. Their most intelligent would serve as scientists and engineers, working under constant threat to their family's safety. But, as he turned to leave the auction house, a small part of Zythex's mind lingered on the transmission from Scout Captain Vrylex. The human captain had spoken with such conviction when she mentioned judgment and justice. Most species begged or threatened when faced with Shadowkin power. These humans had responded with righteous anger, as if they truly believed they had the moral authority to judge others. It was amusing, really. Justice was a luxury that only the powerful could afford to dispense. And, in this galaxy, no one was more powerful than the Shadowkin Syndicate. The irony was lost on Zythex that in just a few days, he would discover exactly how wrong he was. He would learn that some species didn't just believe in justice. They were willing to become it, regardless of the cost. He would discover that humans had a unique talent for turning their moral convictions into weapons of war. And he would witness firsthand what happened when a species that valued righteousness above survival decided to pass judgment on those who had forgotten the difference between strength and cruelty. But, for now, Zythex walked through the blood-red corridors of Vorthax Station, surrounded by the suffering of countless innocents, believing that the natural order of the galaxy would continue unchanged. After all, evil had been winning for 10,000 years. What could one new species possibly do to change that? The answer to that question was already traveling through space at faster-than-light speeds, carried by ships bearing the flag of Earth, and crewed by humans who had never learned that some fights were too big to win. They only knew that some fights were too important to lose. And they were coming. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the EDF Righteous, watching the tactical display as her fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Behind her, the largest expeditionary force in Earth's history spread across space like a constellation of righteous fury. 200 ships of various classes, from nimble destroyers to massive battlecruisers, all bearing the blue and white flag of the Earth Defense Force. What made this fleet unique wasn't its size. Other species had fielded larger armadas. It was the purpose that drove every human aboard these vessels. They weren't here for conquest or resources. They weren't seeking territory or tribute. They were here because 6 months ago, they had received a transmission that changed everything humanity thought about their place in the universe. The message had come from the Zolonian refugee ship Peaceful Dawn, one of the few vessels that had escaped the Shadowkin attack on their homeworld. The transmission was weak, partially corrupted, but clear enough to convey a simple fact. The galaxy was ruled by evil, and no one was fighting back. For humans, this revelation was like discovering that their neighborhood was controlled by organized crime while the police stood by and did nothing. But, unlike most species, humans had a peculiar reaction to learning about injustice. They immediately wanted to fix it. Admiral, called Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez from the communications station. We're receiving multiple distress signals from the inner system. It looks like the Shadowkin are in the middle of raiding civilian populations on Kepler 442b. Chen's jaw tightened. The planet was home to the Voxari, a peaceful species of crystalline beings who had never harmed anyone. Their only crime was existing in territory the Shadowkin considered their hunting ground. How many Shadowkin ships? Chen asked, her voice carrying the steel that had made her the youngest admiral in EDF history. Sensors show 37 vessels in various attack formations, reported the tactical officer. Standard raider configuration, fast ships designed for hit and run attacks on defenseless populations. Chen nodded grimly. Earth's intelligence services had spent months studying Shadowkin tactics. They were experts at terrorizing civilian populations, but their strategies relied on facing opponents who couldn't or wouldn't fight back effectively. They had never encountered a military force that was specifically designed to protect innocent life at any cost. Signal the fleet, Chen commanded. All ships to battle stations. Operation Thunderstorm is now active. Across the human fleet, alarms began sounding as thousands of sailors, marines, and pilots prepared for humanity's first major engagement with galactic evil. But these weren't just soldiers. They were volunteers who had enlisted specifically for this mission after learning about the Shadowkin's crimes. Every human aboard these ships had seen the footage from Zolonian survivors, had heard the testimonies of species who had suffered under syndicate rule, and had decided that such evil could not be allowed to continue. The tactical display updated as human ships began moving into attack formations. Unlike other galactic militaries, the Earth Defense Force had been built with a specific philosophy: overwhelming firepower applied with surgical precision to minimize civilian casualties while maximizing enemy losses. They didn't fight to capture territory or slaves. They fought to end threats permanently. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Shadowkin fleet," Rodriguez announced. "They're demanding we withdraw immediately or face processing as new slave stock." Chin's expression didn't change. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Shadowkin raider. The alien captain was a typical example of his species, tall, armored in chitinous plates, with 6 eyes that glowed with predatory malice. When he spoke, his voice carried the arrogance of a creature that had never been seriously challenged. "Unknown vessels, you have entered Shadowkin territory without permission," the alien captain hissed. "I am Captain Scarlex of the Raiderbone Harvest. You will immediately cease movement and prepare for boarding. Your crews will be evaluated for usefulness to the Syndicate. Those deemed valuable will serve. Those deemed worthless will be disposed of. This is your only warning." Chin stepped forward, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that had become legendary among human forces. "Captain Scarlex, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force. You are hereby ordered to cease your attack on innocent civilians and surrender for trial on charges of piracy, slavery, and crimes against sentient life." The Shadowkin captain's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Trial? You would put the Shadowkin on trial? We are the apex predators of this galaxy, human. We do not answer to prey species. Everyone answers to justice eventually," Chin replied calmly. "The question is whether you'll surrender peacefully or resist and face the consequences." "Consequences?" Scarlex's 6 eyes blazed with amusement. "What consequences could a primitive species like yours possibly threaten us with?" Chin's smile was cold as winter on Mars. "You're about to find out." The communication channel closed, leaving the human bridge in tense silence. Around them, the Shadowkin fleet was reforming, abandoning their attack on the planet's surface to face this new threat. Their ships moved with practiced efficiency, formations designed to overwhelm and capture enemy vessels with minimal damage to potentially useful technology. "All ships report ready for combat," the tactical officer announced. "Signal from the Voxari government," Rodriguez added. "They're begging us to withdraw. They say no one has ever successfully challenged the Shadowkin and lived." Chin closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of all the species who had said the same thing. Entire civilizations had convinced themselves that evil was simply too powerful to fight, that the best they could hope for was to minimize their suffering by submitting quickly. But humans had never accepted that philosophy. "The Voxari have been terrorized for so long they've forgotten what hope looks like," Chin said softly. "Today, we remind them." She turned to the tactical officer. "Execute Alpha Pattern. All ships, weapons free. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth today. We're fighting for every species that's ever been told they're too weak to resist evil." The human fleet erupted into motion. Unlike the Shadowkin's chaotic swarming tactics, the EDF moved with mechanical precision. Ships took predetermined positions, creating interlocking fields of fire that would maximize damage while minimizing friendly fire incidents. It was a formation that had been practiced thousands of times in simulation and refined through humanity's history of warfare. The Shadowkin, confident in their numerical advantage and centuries of military dominance, charged forward with typical aggression. Their ships were fast and well-armed, designed to close distance quickly and overwhelm opponents through superior firepower and boarding actions. It was a strategy that had worked against every species they had encountered. But they had never fought humans before. The first exchange of fire came at maximum range. Shadowkin plasma cannons lanced out across space, targeting what they assumed would be fragile exploration vessels. Instead, their weapons struck military-grade shields that had been designed to withstand anything the universe could throw at them. The human ships absorbed the punishment without slowing their advance. The return volley was devastating. Human kinetic weapons, mass drivers that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, struck Shadowkin ships with surgical precision. Each shot was calculated by advanced AI systems that analyzed enemy ship designs in real time, identifying critical weak points and exploiting them ruthlessly. Where Shadowkin weapons relied on brute force, human weapons relied on intelligence and precision. The Raider Blood Moon exploded in a brilliant flash as a human projectile struck its reactor core directly. The destroyer Agony's Edge lost its forward section when a mass driver round punched through its hull like it was made of paper. Within seconds of the engagement beginning, the Shadowkin had lost 3 ships. Impossible, breathed Captain Scarlex from his bridge, watching his forces take casualties at a rate that defied belief. How are they targeting our critical systems so precisely? His answer came in the form of another human volley that destroyed 2 more raiders and crippled a third. The humans weren't just firing randomly. They were dissecting Shadowkin ships with the precision of surgeons, each shot calculated to cause maximum damage while minimizing the risk of hitting escape pods or captured civilians. All ships, retreat to Rally Point 7, Scarlex ordered, his voice no longer carrying its earlier arrogance. Signal the Syndicate. These humans fight like nothing we've encountered. But Chen wasn't about to let them escape. The human fleet pursued relentlessly, their faster ships hurting the fleeing Shadowkin, while their heavy cruisers continued to rain destruction on any vessel that tried to break formation. The engagement lasted less than an hour. When it ended, 31 Shadowkin ships had been destroyed, 5 had been captured with their crews taken prisoner, and only 1 had escaped to carry word back to the Syndicate. The human fleet hadn't lost a single vessel, though several had taken damage that would require repair. As human rescue ships moved to assist the Voxari on the planet's surface, Chen received a communication from the Voxari planetary government. Admiral Chen, the crystalline being on the screen said, her voice trembling with disbelief, We don't understand. No one challenges the Shadowkin. No one wins against them. How did you? Because someone has to, Chen replied simply. Evil only wins when good people choose not to fight. The Voxari representative was silent for a long moment. What happens now? The Syndicate will send more ships. They'll bring their entire fleet to destroy you for this defiance. Chen looked at the tactical display, where her ships were already beginning rescue operations to free captured slaves from the disabled Shadowkin vessels. Each freed prisoner was another soul rescued from a lifetime of torment, another victory for justice over cruelty. Then, we'll be ready for them, she said. And, when they come, they'll learn the same lesson their advance force just learned, that sometimes the universe sends exactly the right species to the right place at the right time. As the EDF Righteous moved into orbit around Kepler 442b, its mission far from over, news of the engagement spread across subspace communication networks. For the first time in 10,000 years, someone had not just resisted the Shadowkin Syndicate, they had defeated them decisively. Across the galaxy, in slave camps and refugee settlements, in the hidden bases of resistance movements that had thought themselves forgotten, the same whispered question began to spread. Who are these humans? And can they really challenge the Syndicate? The answer was already being written in the wreckage of Shadowkin ships and the grateful tears of freed slaves. Humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage not with conquest or diplomacy, but with justice delivered at the point of a mass driver round. And they were just getting started. High Overlord Nexus Prime stood in the command center of the dreadnought Nightmare's Edge, his 12-meter frame radiating the cold fury that had made him the most feared leader in Shadowkin history. Unlike his subordinates, Nexus Prime was a rare variant of the Shadowkin species, a primal alpha whose evolution had been guided by centuries of genetic manipulation and combat enhancement. His chitinous armor was black as the void between stars, and his 8 eyes could process visual data across 17 different spectrums simultaneously. Around him, the command center of the massive ship buzzed with activity as Battle Group Omega prepared for the largest military operation in recent Syndicate history. Through the massive viewport, he could see the assembled fleet, 300 of the Syndicate's most powerful warships, including 27 dreadnoughts, 85 heavy cruisers, and nearly 200 support vessels. It was enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. Status report, Nexus Prime commanded, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies that other Shadowkin found both commanding and terrifying. All ships report ready for battle. High Overlord, responded Fleet Commander Vexthor, a scarred veteran of 100 campaigns. Long-range sensors have located the human homeworld, a single planet in an unremarkable system, defended by what appears to be a modest fleet. Nexus Prime's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Numbers. Approximately 400 vessels of various classes, Vexthor consulted his tactical display. Our intelligence suggests they're divided between defensive platforms around their homeworld and patrol fleets in neighboring systems. Nothing that should present a significant challenge to our forces. Good, Nexus Prime said, though something about the report troubled him. Since news of the Kepler 442 incident had reached Syndicate High Command, 3 more human fleets had engaged Shadowkin forces. Each time, the humans had achieved complete victory with minimal losses. It was unprecedented in galactic history. High Overlord, interrupted communications specialist ZY Keth. We're receiving a priority transmission from Intelligence Division. They've completed their analysis of human combat capabilities. Display it. A holographic interface materialized in front of Nexus Prime, showing detailed technical specifications that made his eyes widen in surprise. The human ships were more advanced than initial reports had suggested. Their weapons technology was comparable to Syndicate standards, but their defensive capabilities and tactical coordination were extraordinary. Most interesting, Nexus Prime mused, studying the data. It appears these humans have developed military technology specifically optimized for fighting opponents like us. How is that possible? Vexthor asked. They've only recently achieved interstellar travel. They shouldn't have the experience necessary to develop such specialized systems. Nexus Prime was beginning to understand. Because they didn't develop this technology to fight us specifically, they developed it to fight each other. Look at these weapon specifications. Every system is designed for maximum efficiency against heavily armored opponents. Their entire military doctrine is based on overwhelming firepower and precision targeting. The implications were troubling. Most galactic species had evolved beyond large-scale warfare before achieving interstellar travel. They developed space-based militaries primarily for exploration and defense against natural disasters. But humans appeared to have brought their planet's history of constant warfare directly into space, creating a military machine that was horrifyingly efficient. It doesn't matter, Vexthor said, though his voice carried less confidence than before. They may have advanced weapons, but they lack our numbers and experience. This fleet alone has more combat experience than their entire species. Nexus Prime wasn't so certain. The more he studied the intelligence reports, the more he realized that humans fought differently from any species the Syndicate had encountered. They didn't just seek to win battles. They sought to utterly destroy their enemy's ability to continue fighting. Every human engagement had ended with complete annihilation of Shadowkin forces. High Overlord, ZY Keth announced. We're receiving another transmission. This one is addressed directly to you from the human leadership. Put it through. The holographic display shifted to show a human female in a crisp military uniform. She appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that held the kind of steel that came from making difficult decisions for the greater good. Behind her, Nexus Prime could see what appeared to be a military command center filled with humans working at various stations. I am Admiral Elena Vasquez, Supreme Commander of Earth Defense Forces, the human said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute conviction. High Overlord Nexus Prime, you are approaching our territory with hostile intent. This is your final opportunity to withdraw peacefully. Nexus Prime laughed, a sound like grinding metal that echoed through the command center. Admiral Vasquez, I am High Overlord Nexus Prime, Supreme Commander of the Shadowkin Syndicate. Your species has interfered with Syndicate operations for the last time. You will surrender your entire fleet and submit your population for evaluation and processing. Those deemed useful will serve the Syndicate. The rest will be eliminated as an example to others who would dare challenge our authority. Admiral Vasquez's expression didn't change. High Overlord, your forces have committed countless acts of piracy, slavery, and genocide across the galaxy. By the authority vested in me by the United Earth Government and the moral imperative to protect innocent life, I hereby place you and all Shadowkin forces under arrest for crimes against sentience. Surrender now, and you will receive fair trials under galactic law. The audacity was breathtaking. Nexus Prime had conquered star systems, enslaved entire species, and personally executed thousands of enemies. The idea that this human believed she could arrest him was beyond absurd. It was insulting. Galactic law? Nexus Prime's voice rose to a roar. We are galactic law? The Shadowkin Syndicate has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. We decide who lives and who dies, who serves, and who rules. You are nothing but primitives from a backwater world, and we will teach you your place in the natural order. Admiral Vasquez remained calm. High Overlord, you represent everything that is wrong with this galaxy. The belief that might makes right, that cruelty is strength, that the strong have the right to prey upon the weak. Today that ends. Ends. Nexus Prime's 8 eyes blazed with fury. Admiral, when this battle is over, your homeworld will be a smoking ruin. Your species will serve as slaves in our gladiatorial arenas. And you will watch as we systematically destroy every trace of human civilization before we finally grant you the mercy of death. Maybe, Admiral Vasquez replied. But first, you'll have to get through us. And High Overlord, we didn't come this far and sacrifice this much to lose to the likes of you. The transmission ended, leaving the Shadowkin command center in tense silence. Arrogant primitives, Vexthor spat. They actually believe they can challenge the might of the Syndicate. But Nexus Prime was studying the tactical display with growing unease. The human fleet had deployed in a defensive formation around their homeworld, but it wasn't a typical defensive posture. Their ships were positioned in a pattern he didn't recognize, with overlapping fields of fire that would make any assault extremely costly. Begin the attack, he commanded. All ships, advance to engagement range. Target their command vessels first. Once their leadership is eliminated, the rest will surrender. Battle Group Omega surged forward, 300 ships moving in the traditional Shadowkin attack formation. An overwhelming charge designed to close distance quickly and engage at point-blank range where their superior numbers would tell. It was a tactic that had worked for millennia against every opponent they had faced. The humans waited. As the range closed, the first exchange of fire began. Shadowkin plasma cannons and particle beams lanced out across space, targeting the largest human vessels. The humans' defensive shields flared under the assault, but held firm. Return fire came immediately, not the scattered shots of a surprised defender, but the coordinated volley of a military force that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The difference was immediately apparent. Where Shadowkin weapons relied on overwhelming firepower, human weapons were precision instruments. Every shot was calculated by advanced targeting computers, every projectile guided by AI systems that could adjust their trajectory mid-flight. The results were devastating. The heavy cruiser Death Shadow exploded as a human missile punched through its armor and detonated its ammunition stores. The destroyer Payne's Edge broke apart when a mass driver round severed its superstructure. Within the first minute of combat, the Shadowkin had lost 8 ships while the humans had suffered only minor damage. Impossible, breathed Vexthor, watching his forces take casualties at an unprecedented rate. How are they targeting our weak points so precisely? Because they've studied us, Nexus Prime realized grimly. Every engagement we've had with them, every ship we've lost, they've been analyzing our technology, learning our weaknesses. The battle continued to rage, but it quickly became apparent that the Shadowkin were outmatched. The humans fought with a coordination and efficiency that spoke of years of preparation. Their ships moved like parts of a single organism, creating overlapping fields of fire that made it impossible for Shadowkin vessels to close to effective range. More disturbing was the humans' apparent disregard for their own casualties. When Shadowkin forces managed to damage human vessels, the crews didn't retreat or surrender. They continued fighting even when their ships were breaking apart around them. It was a level of fanatical dedication that even the Shadowkin found unsettling. High Overlord, reported the tactical officer. We've lost 67 ships. Human losses are minimal. Nexus Prime snarled in frustration. This was supposed to be a simple punitive expedition against a primitive species. Instead, he was witnessing the systematic destruction of the largest Shadowkin fleet ever assembled. Signal retreat, he commanded, the words bitter in his mouth. High Overlord, you heard me. Signal general retreat. Reform at Rally Point Alpha. As the surviving Shadowkin ships began to withdraw, they found their escape routes blocked. Human vessels had somehow anticipated their retreat patterns and moved to intercept. Ships that had seemed damaged or destroyed suddenly came back online, revealing that the humans had been deliberately drawing the Shadowkin deeper into their defensive network. It's a trap, Vexthor whispered in horror. They've been hurting us the entire time. The systematic annihilation that followed would become known in galactic history as the Battle of Sol, though humans simply called it the day they introduced the Shadowkin Syndicate to the concept of consequences. When it ended 6 hours later, only 12 Shadowkin vessels escaped. 300 of the galaxy's most feared warships had been reduced to debris and radiation. High Overlord Nexus Prime, Supreme Commander of the Shadowkin Syndicate, found himself aboard a crippled dreadnought, watching human rescue ships move through the wreckage. They weren't looting or enslaving the survivors. They were actually rescuing them, pulling Shadowkin personnel from damaged ships and providing medical treatment. For the first time in his long life, Nexus Prime began to understand that he had encountered something truly dangerous, a species that fought not for conquest or glory, but for justice. And justice, as he was about to learn, was the most terrifying weapon in the universe. The Galactic Assembly had not convened an emergency session in over 3,000 years. The massive chamber on Neutral Station held representatives from 417 different species, all gathered to address a crisis that threatened to upend the established order of their galaxy. Above them, holographic displays showed real-time reports of human fleets systematically dismantling Shadowkin Syndicate operations across dozens of star systems. Ambassador Tkaith of the Altarian Republic stood at the central podium, his tentacles writhing with barely contained anxiety. As the current Assembly Chairman, it fell to him to address a situation that no one had prepared for. What to do when someone actually challenged the galaxy's apex predators and won. Distinguished delegates, Tkaith began, his translator converting his bioluminescent communications into audible speech. We gather today to address the human question. In the span of just 3 months, this previously unknown species has achieved something that our combined civilizations have failed to accomplish in 10 millennia. They have successfully resisted the Shadowkin Syndicate. A murmur of unease rippled through the assembly. Representatives exchanged worried glances as updated casualty reports continued to stream across the displays. The numbers were staggering. Over 1,500 Shadowkin vessels destroyed, 43 major syndicate facilities captured or demolished, and an estimated 2 million slaves liberated from various installations. The question before us, Tkaith continued, is whether we should support these human efforts or attempt to negotiate a peaceful resolution to prevent further escalation. Ambassador Veltar of the Draconian Empire rose from his seat, his massive reptilian form drawing attention from across the chamber. Peaceful resolution? Chairman Tkaith, with respect, the humans have already escalated beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. They haven't simply resisted the Syndicate, they've declared war on them. And they're winning, added Ambassador Lyrics of the Centauri Coalition, her cybernetic implants gleaming in the chamber's light. Every intelligence report confirms that human forces are conducting military operations with a level of efficiency that defies conventional understanding. They're not just fighting the Shadowkin, they're hunting them. The truth of this statement was evident in the tactical displays surrounding the chamber. Human fleets weren't engaging in defensive actions or retaliatory strikes. They were conducting systematic search and destroy missions against every Shadowkin installation they could locate. More disturbing was their apparent ability to predict Shadowkin movements and intercept them before they could reach their targets. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Keth of the Pacifist Collective, we should attempt to mediate this conflict before it spirals further out of control. The humans may not understand the full implications of challenging the Syndicate. This comment drew derisive laughter from several delegates. Ambassador Zorn of the Warrior Clan stood up, his scarred face bearing the marks of countless battles. Not understand the implications? Zorn's voice boomed across the chamber. Ambassador Keth, the humans understand perfectly. They've studied Shadowkin operations for months before beginning their campaign. Every action they've taken has been calculated and precise. These aren't reckless primitives stumbling into a war. They're strategic masterminds executing a carefully planned military campaign. Ambassador Tkaith called for order as the chamber erupted into heated discussions. The political implications of the human war against the Syndicate were staggering. For thousands of years, galactic civilization had existed in an uneasy balance with the Shadowkin. Most species paid tribute, either in resources or populations, to avoid direct confrontation. Trade routes were planned around syndicate territory. Entire governments structured their policies around the need to avoid attracting Shadowkin attention. Now, suddenly, that entire system was collapsing. "We need to address the practical reality," announced Ambassador Corvex of the Trade Federation, his mechanical voice cutting through the noise. "The humans are disrupting established trade agreements. Their liberation of slave populations is creating massive refugee crises. Their destruction of Shadowkin facilities is eliminating economic structures that many of our governments depend upon." This was the uncomfortable truth that many delegates didn't want to acknowledge. The Shadowkin Syndicate, for all its cruelty, had become an integral part of the galaxy's economic structure. They provided certain services, elimination of political dissidents, acquisition of rare resources from dangerous regions, and population control for overpopulated worlds that many governments had come to rely upon. "Are you seriously suggesting?" interrupted Ambassador Silva of the Human Diplomatic Corps, her voice carrying the steel that had become characteristic of human representatives, "that this assembly is more concerned about economic disruption than the liberation of enslaved populations?" Ambassador Silva was one of the few humans who had been granted observer status in the assembly. Unlike the military commanders who were fighting the war, she was a career diplomat who understood the complex political realities of galactic civilization. But her presence in the chamber was a constant reminder that humanity was no longer asking for permission to act. They were simply informing the galaxy of their intentions. "Ambassador Silva," Keith said carefully, "no one in this chamber supports slavery or the Syndicate's criminal activities. However, we must consider the practical implications of completely destabilizing the current galactic order." "The current galactic order," Silva replied coldly, "is built on the systematic oppression of innocent populations. If maintaining your political stability requires tolerating genocide and slavery, then perhaps it's time for a new order." The chamber fell silent. The human had just articulated what many delegates feared, but none had been willing to say aloud: that humanity's war against the Shadowkin was about more than eliminating a criminal organization. It was about fundamentally restructuring galactic civilization around different principles. "What exactly do the humans want?" asked Ambassador Thyros of the Academic Consortium. "Are you seeking to replace the Syndicate as the galaxy's dominant military power?" Silva stood and activated a holographic display that showed the current state of human military operations. The scope was breathtaking. Human fleets were operating across 17 different sectors simultaneously, conducting operations that range from direct military engagements to complex rescue missions. "The United Earth government has 3 primary objectives," Silva announced. "First, the complete elimination of the Shadowkin Syndicate as an organized entity. Second, the liberation and repatriation of all enslaved populations under Syndicate control. Third, the establishment of galactic laws and enforcement mechanisms that will prevent similar organizations from arising in the future." "Enforcement mechanisms?" Ambassador Veltar's voice carried a dangerous undertone. "Are you suggesting that humanity intends to impose its will upon the rest of the galaxy?" "We're suggesting that the galaxy needs institutions capable of protecting innocent life," Silva replied. "Your current system has demonstrated its complete inability to address threats to civilized society. The Shadowkin Syndicate operated openly for 10,000 years while every government in this chamber chose to accommodate them rather than confront them. Because confronting them meant suicide," exploded Ambassador Nex of the Rim Worlds. "The Syndicate has the largest military force in the galaxy. No single species has ever possessed the power necessary to challenge them successfully." "Had," Silva corrected quietly. Past tense. Current intelligence suggests that functional Shadowkin military capacity has been reduced by approximately 70% over the past 3 months. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. 70% of the most feared military force in galactic history, eliminated in just 3 months by a species that most delegates had never heard of 6 months ago. "How?" whispered Ambassador Lyrics. "How is that even possible?" Silva's expression remained neutral, but there was a hint of pride in her voice when she answered. "Because humans don't fight to win battles, Ambassador. We fight to win wars. And we don't believe in acceptable losses when it comes to protecting innocent life." She activated another display showing detailed breakdowns of human military capabilities. The technology wasn't necessarily superior to what other species possessed, but the integration and coordination were unprecedented. Human fleets operated with a level of tactical sophistication that spoke of centuries of military evolution. The truth that this assembly needs to confront, Silva continued, is that the Shadowkin Syndicate was allowed to exist because none of your governments were willing to pay the price necessary to eliminate them. You chose the comfort of accommodation over the sacrifice required for justice. And humans are willing to pay that price? Asked Ambassador Keith. Silva's smile was cold as starlight. Ambassador, we've already paid it. Every human ship in our fleets is crewed by volunteers who enlisted specifically for this war. Every pilot, every Marine, every technician made a conscious choice to risk their lives to protect strangers they'll never meet. That's what it takes to fight real evil. The willingness to sacrifice everything for people who can't protect themselves. The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates realized the full implications of Silva's words. The humans weren't fighting a conventional war with limited objectives. They were conducting a moral crusade with the ultimate goal of restructuring galactic civilization around principles of justice rather than expediency. Order! Order! Keith called, his tentacles flashing with frustrated bioluminescence. The question remains, what response should this assembly make to human military actions? May I suggest, said a new voice from the chamber's entrance, that you consider the alternative to supporting our efforts? Every eye turned to see Admiral Sarah Chun entering the chamber, flanked by 2 human Marines in full combat armor. Her presence was a breach of protocol. Military commanders weren't typically permitted in assembly sessions, but no one seemed inclined to object. Admiral Chun, Keith said carefully, this is a diplomatic gathering. Military personnel are not. Ambassador Keith. Chun interrupted politely, but firmly. With respect, this stopped being a diplomatic issue the moment we discovered the scope of syndicate operations. We've liberated facilities containing over 50,000 enslaved children. We've uncovered evidence of systematic genocide against at least 12 species. We've documented biological weapons experiments that violate every principle of civilized conduct. She activated her own holographic display, showing images that made several delegates physically recoil. The evidence of Shadowkin atrocities was overwhelming. Torture chambers, slave breeding facilities, experimental laboratories where sentient beings were subjected to horrific procedures. This is what your diplomatic solutions have protected for 10,000 years, Chin said quietly. This is the price of your stability and accommodation. So I'll ask you again, what response will this assembly make to our efforts to end it? The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in galactic history, representatives of 400 civilizations found themselves confronted with an uncomfortable truth. They had allowed unimaginable evil to flourish because fighting it would have been inconvenient. And now someone else was paying the price they had been unwilling to pay. Ambassador Silva stepped forward. The United Earth government formally requests the Assembly's support for ongoing operations against the Shadowkin Syndicate. We're not asking for military assistance. We can handle this ourselves. We're asking for logistical support, refugee assistance, and political recognition of our authority to pursue syndicate forces wherever they may flee. And if we refuse? Asked Ambassador Veltar. Admiral Chen's smile was terrifying in its absolute confidence. Then, we'll continue without your help. But, Ambassador, I want you to consider something. If we can eliminate the Shadowkin Syndicate without your assistance, what makes you think we need your permission for anything? The threat was implicit, but unmistakable. Humanity had demonstrated the ability to project military power on a galactic scale. They had shown themselves willing to prioritize moral principles over political convenience. And they had made it clear that they would reshape galactic civilization with or without the Assembly's cooperation. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than many expected but decisive nonetheless. By a margin of 267 to 150, the Galactic Assembly formally recognized humanity's right to pursue the Shadowkin Syndicate and agreed to provide humanitarian support for liberation efforts. As the session concluded and delegates filed out in small groups, many were already making private calculations about how to position their governments for the new galactic order that was clearly emerging. The humans had demonstrated something that had seemed impossible, that moral conviction, properly applied, could overcome any amount of entrenched evil. But, in the shadows between the stars, the surviving leaders of the Shadowkin Syndicate were making their own plans. They had underestimated humanity once. They would not make that mistake again. The real war was just beginning. The Shadowkin Fortress of Oblivion's Gate had never been breached in its 5,000-year history. Built inside a rogue planet drifting in the void between galaxies, it served as the ultimate stronghold for the Syndicate's leadership, a place where the galaxy's most wanted criminals could retreat when all other options were exhausted. Its defenses were legendary. Automated weapon platforms that could sterilize entire fleets, shield generators powered by the planet's core, and a location so remote that finding it required access to the Syndicate's most closely guarded navigation data. Supreme Overlord Malachar stood in the fortress's central command chamber, his ancient form radiating the kind of malevolent power that came from millennia of unchallenged dominance. Unlike other Shadowkin, Malachar was one of the original founders of the Syndicate, a creature so old that his chitinous armor had begun to fuse with cybernetic enhancements, creating a hybrid of organic evolution and technological augmentation that made him nearly indestructible. Around him, the surviving leadership of the Shadowkin Syndicate monitored displays showing their empire's final collapse. In the 18 months since humans had begun their crusade, 96% of Syndicate operations had been eliminated. Hundreds of thousands of slaves had been liberated. Entire sectors that had lived in terror for millennia were now under human protection. Status report, Malachar commanded, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies that had once struck fear into the hearts of entire species. "It's over," replied High Commander Zexthal, one of the few military leaders who had survived human attacks. "The last of our operational fleets was destroyed 6 hours ago at the Kepler Nebula. Admiral Chen's forces showed no mercy. They hunted down every ship, every escape pod, every survivor." Malachar's 12 eyes focused on the tactical display with cold calculation. The humans had demonstrated a level of strategic brilliance that defied conventional understanding. They hadn't simply defeated Shadowkin forces. They had systematically dismantled the entire organization with surgical precision. "What about our assets in the Outer Rim?" Malachar asked. "Gone," reported Intelligence Director Vorth. "The humans somehow obtained our complete database of hidden facilities. They struck simultaneously across 47 star systems, eliminating installations that we thought were secret. Our entire intelligence network has been compromised." The scope of human intelligence capabilities was perhaps the most troubling aspect of their campaign. They had demonstrated knowledge of Shadowkin operations that should have been impossible for an outside force to obtain. More disturbing, they had shown an ability to predict Syndicate movements and intercept communications in real time. "How many of us remain?" Malachar asked quietly. "Here in the fortress? Perhaps 3,000 personnel," Zexthal replied. "Across the galaxy? Our estimates suggest fewer than 50,000 Shadowkin are still alive and uncaptured." The numbers were devastating. From a peak population of over 20 million, the Shadowkin species had been reduced to scattered survivors hiding in the deepest corners of space. The humans hadn't simply defeated them. They had brought them to the edge of extinction. "Supreme Overlord," interrupted communications specialist Kyrex. "We're receiving a transmission from human forces. They claim to have located our position." Malachar's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Impossible. The navigation data for this location is stored only in my personal memory engrams. No external force could possibly." The fortress's proximity alarms began screaming as massive objects dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the surrounding space. Through the command chamber's armored viewports, the impossible became visible. A human fleet emerging from hyperspace with perfect precision, their ships moving in formations that spoke of absolute tactical superiority. "How many ships?" Malachar demanded. "Sensors show over 600 vessels," the tactical officer reported, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Every major class of human warship is represented. It's their entire battle fleet." "Put them through," Malachar commanded. The main display activated to show the bridge of a human dreadnought. Admiral Sarah Chun stood at the center of the image, flanked by officers whose uniforms bore the insignia of a dozen different human military services. Behind them, Tactical displays showed the complete encirclement of Oblivion's gate. Supreme Overlord Malachar, Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force. You are hereby ordered to surrender unconditionally for trial on charges of genocide, slavery, piracy, and crimes against sentient life. Malachar's laughter was like the sound of breaking stone. Admiral Chun, you have achieved something that I thought impossible. You have successfully challenged the Shadowkin Syndicate. But this fortress has never been breached. Your fleet, impressive though it may be, cannot penetrate defenses that have withstood every assault for 5 millennia. We're not here to assault your fortress, Chen replied calmly. We're here to offer you a choice. A choice. Surrender now, and you and your people will receive fair trials under galactic law. Resist, and we'll demonstrate why the Syndicate's reign of terror is ending today. Malachar's eyes blazed with ancient fury. You think to threaten me? I am Malachar the Eternal. I have existed since before your species discovered fire. I have watched civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore. What could primitive humans possibly do that would convince me to surrender? Admiral Chen's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested that Malachar had just made a terrible mistake. Computer, execute Protocol Omega. Across the human fleet, a new type of weapon system activated, devices that the Shadowkin had never encountered before. Unlike conventional weapons that targeted ships and shields, these systems projected massive gravitational fields that began affecting the rogue planet itself. What are you doing? Malachar demanded as the fortress began to shudder around him. The same thing we've done to every Shadowkin installation we've encountered, Chen replied. We're removing it from the universe. The truth hit Malachar like a physical blow. The humans weren't just military conquerors. They were technological revolutionaries who had developed weapons based on principles that the Shadowkin couldn't comprehend. Their gravitational manipulators were pulling the rogue planet apart at a subatomic level, disintegrating matter in a way that made conventional defenses irrelevant. Impossible, breathed High Commander Zexthal, watching as sections of the fortress began to collapse despite having shields that could withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons. Nothing is impossible when you're fighting for justice, Chen said simply. Supreme Overlord, you have 30 seconds to surrender before this installation is completely destroyed. Malachar stood frozen as his empire's ultimate stronghold crumbled around him. For the first time in his millennia-long existence, he was facing an opponent who possessed not just superior firepower, but superior principles. The humans weren't fighting for conquest or revenge. They were fighting to eliminate evil itself. Why? He finally asked, his voice barely audible above the sound of collapsing superstructure. Why did your species choose to fight us? You could have remained in your corner of the galaxy, safe from our attention. Why risk everything for strangers you'll never meet? Admiral Chen looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because someone has to. Because justice isn't negotiable. Because in a universe where evil like yours is allowed to flourish, nowhere is truly safe. The fortress shuddered as another section was torn apart by gravitational forces. Alarms screamed warnings about structural failure and atmospheric breach. Around the command chamber, Shadowkin personnel watched in terrified fascination as their impregnable stronghold was systematically dismantled. 10 seconds, Chen announced. Malachar closed his 12 eyes and contemplated the irony of his situation. He had spent millennia believing that power was the ultimate currency in the universe, that the strong had the natural right to dominate the weak. Now he was learning that there was something stronger than power, the absolute conviction that some things were worth dying to protect. I surrender, he said quietly. The gravitational fields ceased immediately. Human rescue ships moved with practiced efficiency to extract survivors from the damaged fortress. Within hours, the most feared criminals in galactic history found themselves in detention facilities that were cleaner and more humane than most civilian accommodations in Syndicate territory. The trials that followed were broadcast across the galaxy, watched by billions of beings who had never believed they would live to see justice served against their oppressors. The proceedings were scrupulously fair. Every defendant received competent legal representation. Every piece of evidence was thoroughly examined. Every right was protected under galactic law. The verdicts were unanimous. The sentences were severe, but just. Supreme Overlord Malachar, architect of 10,000 years of suffering, was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 500 years of demonstrable rehabilitation. Other syndicate leaders received sentences proportional to their crimes. Most importantly, the trials established precedents for galactic law enforcement that would prevent similar organizations from arising in the future. But perhaps the most significant moment came during Admiral Chen's testimony before the Special Tribunal. When asked why humanity had chosen to intervene in galactic affairs, her answer became legend. Your Honor, throughout human history, we've learned that evil flourishes when good people choose to do nothing. We came to space hoping to find civilizations that had transcended the petty cruelties that plagued our homeworld. Instead, we found a galaxy where the most advanced species had simply chosen to accommodate evil rather than confront it. We couldn't live with that knowledge. And what does humanity expect to gain from these actions? The presiding judge asked. Chen's smile was warm and genuine. The knowledge that we did the right thing. That children across the galaxy can sleep safely because we chose to act when action was needed. That justice isn't just an ideal. It's a responsibility that someone must be willing to bear. In the months that followed, the transformation of galactic civilization was remarkable. Former syndicate territory was integrated into a new cooperative framework based on mutual protection rather than exploitation. Slave populations were not just liberated, but given resources and assistance to rebuild their lives. Species that had lived in terror for millennia began to explore possibilities they had never dared imagine. The Galactic Assembly was restructured around principles of collective security and mutual aid. Human military forces became the enforcement arm of a new interstellar law enforcement agency dedicated to preventing the rise of future criminal organizations. Most importantly, the galaxy species began working together to address the root causes of the problems that had allowed the syndicate to flourish. On Earth, Admiral Sarah Chun stood in her office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, reading reports from across the galaxy. Former slave worlds were developing their own space programs. Refugee populations were being resettled on habitable planets. Scientific cooperation between species was accelerating at an unprecedented rate. Her aide, Commander Rodriguez, entered with the day's intelligence briefing. Admiral, our deep space monitoring stations have detected no sign of organized criminal activity in any of the sectors we're monitoring. The last syndicate holdouts surrendered 3 days ago. Chen nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. What about the refugee integration programs? Proceeding better than expected. The Zolonians have established their new colony on Kepler 442c. The Voxari are working with our terraforming teams to restore their homeworld. The former slave populations we liberated are showing remarkable resilience. Good, Chen said. What about the prevention protocols? All galactic governments have signed the Mutual Protection Accords. The early warning systems are operational. Any attempt to establish criminal organizations on the scale of the syndicate will be detected and interdicted immediately. Chen walked to the window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were living free lives because humanity had chosen to act rather than accommodate evil. It hadn't been easy. The war had cost thousands of human lives and required sacrifices that would be felt for generations. But it had been worth it. Commander, she said quietly, make sure the monitoring stations understand. We're not just watching for new threats. We're watching for new opportunities to help. Ma'am. Chen turned back to her aide with the smile that had become famous across the galaxy. Evil flourishes when good people do nothing. But good also flourishes when someone is willing to nurture it. Our job isn't finished just because we defeated the syndicate. Our real work, building a galaxy where justice prevails, is just beginning. As night fell over Earth, lights began to appear in the sky, not stars, but the running lights of ships from dozens of species traveling freely through space that was now safe for all peaceful beings. The darkness between the stars, once ruled by predators and parasites, had been transformed into highways of hope. The Underworld had indeed dominated the stars for 10,000 years. But they had made one fatal error. They had forgotten that somewhere in the universe, there might be a species that refused to accept evil as inevitable. That species had found them. And now, in every corner of the galaxy where beings dreamed of freedom and justice, Children would grow up knowing that when good people choose to act, no evil is too powerful to overcome. The judgment had been delivered, and justice had won.